From the writer who brought you Catsby, 50 Shames of Earl Grey, and the Obama-Biden murder mysteries. And the filmmaker turned bookseller who brought you Bubbles and Making Bubbles. Critics agree Andrew Shaffer and Bob Lingle have done something in relation to comedy. And now, finally, these two men, despite their sordid pasts, have agreed to sit down and discuss the necessity of comedy. You are invited to join in this conversation. Your life may depend upon it.
I'm the kind of guy who laughs at a funeral. Can't understand what I mean? You soon will. That is a quote from the Bare Naked Ladies and also a true fact about myself. I am Bob Lingle of Off the Beaten Path Bookstore in Lakewood, New York, and our guest here tonight is the New York Times bestselling author of Hope Never Dies, an Obama-Biden mystery, the international bestselling parody 50 Shames of Earl Grey, and over a dozen other humorous works of genre fiction from mystery to horror. He is a 4-time Goodreads Choice Award nominee and a 2-time finalist in the humor category. He has appeared as a guest on NPR, Fox News, and CBS, and has been published in McSweeney's, Mental Floss, and The Daily Beast. Shaffer attended the Iowa Writers Workshop and studied comedy writing at the Second City, Chicago's famed improv school. An Iowa native, Shaffer lives in Louisville, Kentucky, with his wife, novelist Tiffany Reisz. He teaches and mentors writers in person and online at Lexington's Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning at Louisville Literary Arts. His latest novel, Secret Santa, a horror for the holidays, is available from your local indie bookstore, and his newest release is a full-length dime house poetry collection, Look, Mom, I'm a Poet, and So Is My Cat. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Shaffer. Thanks for joining us tonight.
I was expecting some applause there. I can't hear it.
If I had an applause track, I would put it in.
Oh, okay.
But
okay.
We can only assume people are applauding now.
Yeah, I just can't. Yeah, it's fine. I hear them in my head.
So with the quote that I referenced in the beginning, I want to explain it. But I also want to ask you a question to think about. Have you ever been in a situation where you shouldn't have been laughing, but you couldn't stop? And I have a tendency to laugh at funerals. One of the first occurrences was my step-grandfather's. He passed away. He was a very nice man. His grandchildren, could have been great-grandchildren, were putting together a lovely tribute to him of Amazing Grace. It was a vocalist, a guitarist, and a triangleist. Very off-key. It was amazing, Pong Grace, ding. And I was just, fortunately, I started crying. I was laughing so hard, and I just put my head down, and people thought I was very emotional at the moment. But I was laughing.
That's a good cover.
That's my go-to for laughing inappropriately. Is I'm just going to switch to crying.
Yeah, and I had a situation. Now that I think about it, I had one of the times I'd gotten trouble. I think I got detention for this. Actually, I was in the 8th grade, and it was either 8th or 9th grade, and another kid in my class had done a presentation on drunk driving. However, he was kind of a little mischievous, and he changed it to drunk diving. So every single statistic for the number of deaths, the number of times people go swimming and they die, he was like 40,000 people a year die in drunk diving accidents. And so he was giving this speech just straight faced, and my friend and I were sitting there listening to him, and we were just cracking up. Nobody else in the class was laughing. They did not get the humor. They didn't get that he was mocking them all, because he was just saying, hey, he obviously just took the letter R out of it. And it was just one of the most bizarre things ever, because my friend and I got called out into the afterwards. The teacher was like, you guys are in trouble. This is not how you respond to someone's presentation. And I'm like, but it's funny. He's obviously making it's all bull. And she was just like, you're going to the principal's office. We got detention just for laughing. And I was like, we were not able to control ourselves. I mean, we knew no one else is laughing at this, but we were just cracking up. So it has landed me in trouble before.
as it should. So on my daughter's 7, she's virtual learning. She's finishing up her virtual first grade. She comes to work with me a lot. And on the drive in today, she said, "Why do I want to be so many things when I grew up?" My answer was, there's a lot of things you could be. So it made me think, when did you know that comedy was your thing?
It took me a long time because I always knew I wanted to be a writer, and that's something that I've done my whole life. But it took me a long time to really sort of reconcile doing humorous stuff with the writing, because I always viewed writing as like a serious endeavor. Although I think back to it, some of the first writing that I did was I did a parody of the Justice League. I think I was in the 3rd grade, and it was called the Junkie League. And in Superman and Batman, they were drug users. Flash was the Flasher. This was really inappropriate stuff for someone in the 3rd grade. Sure. And it got passed around like the whole class, like we passed it around and people would crack up at it. And so I just kind of kept you draw 1 or 2 pages and then you pass it around. And that was kind of my first thing that was funny, that I got a reaction out of other people. Mm-hmm. I'd always known I was a bit of a smart ass. I remember it had to be 4 or 5 years old. I had this neighbor and she came out. I was playing in our front yard and she thought I was trying to she's like, "What are you doing playing in your front yard? My daughter can see your toys over there. What if she runs across this street and gets hit by a car?" And then I go, "Well, keep her in your own yard." We got into a back and forth. I'm 5. This woman is 35. And eventually, she's like, "I'm going to tell your mother." I'm like, "Go ahead." And my mom comes out and this woman goes, "Your kid is being a little smart ass to me." And I go, "Yeah, at least I'm not a dumbass." And that was like the first joke I remember telling. Mm-hmm. And it did not get the reaction that it did get a reaction out of the woman. But it didn't get the reaction I wanted out of my mom. And but it was the first time I was like, oh, you can sort of take things and twist them around and sort of be funny, And then I'd always done stuff that I thought was sort of funny. Like I said, the writing, the comic book, but I think once I became a writer, I was going to University of Iowa. I was at the writer's workshop for a very short time, and it was like, you have to be a serious writer. Okay, we're not doing funny stuff. We're not doing any of this genre stuff either. We're just doing some serious writing, And I just could not do it. I would turn every situation around to where it was funny. And so, so it took me a really long time, though, to reconcile those two things, humor and writing, and go, oh, writing funny, mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, well, these people aren't doing it, not because it's bad or anything, just because they can't do it, mm-hmm. Because there certainly is funny, funny literary fiction. But yeah, that was sort of where it all came together, was when I just realized, but by that time I was like 30. I was, no one told me that you could be a comedy writer or a humor writer, when I was 5 years old.
Well, Stephen King had a similar start of writing out short stories that were then passed around. I wonder how much of technology is going to be taken away from future writers or maybe it'll create even more because it's easier to pass them around.
Yeah, I don't know, but I do remember that story of Stephen King. He actually charged for his work, though. He photocopied it and charged it. So he was a couple steps ahead of me, you know.
Yeah, business
and yeah, he was much savvier than I was.
So I had a follow-up question that you already answered of, was it always writing? Going through the Second City program, which is a big deal for people who aren't familiar with comedy. I was impressed when I saw that on your resume. Did performing ever cross your mind once you realized comedy could be an outlet for you?
Yeah. If you're not familiar, Second City is it's a training school and performing center in Chicago. And when I went there, I was just taking like writing classes and improv classes, and you paid like $250 a semester. I was living in Iowa at the time, though. Mm-hmm. And the issue was, you know, it's very limited in Iowa as far as where you can perform. You know, we had one comedy club, you know, within an hour and a half, you know, radius of where I lived, you know. And so if you wanted to do anything else, like take classes or anything like that, you had to go to Chicago. And that's, you know, it was a 4-hour drive. And then I was doing that, you know, every Sunday for, you know, for a year or something. And it got to be a lot. I was just overwhelmed, but just the driving itself. And, you know, to throw on, once you get there, you have to be ready to do improv and try to make those people laugh. And it really did draw, you know, like really, there were really funny people there. And I realized that I was better at the writing than I was so far behind on the performing aspect. I had no idea. I'd done some, you know, amateur stand-up comedy, but these are people that did stuff in high school or college or whatever, and had wanted to do this their whole life. And I was just sort of out of my element there, you know? But it was, there's a lot of things that I learned there, especially with improv comedy, where you're always thinking on your feet, which is just a really good technique for writing, especially like a rough draft or something, where you have to keep your brain going and sort of keep the scene alive, because there are a lot of you know, avenues that you can go down that sort of just kill the creativity, kill the humor, that sort of thing. And so I really apply that directly to my writing these days. And
as you were getting started out, and even still, who are some of your influences in your writing?
Oh, you know, Stephen King was a huge influence. I try to think whoever my influences were, they changed like every other year. For a while, it was Chuck Palahniuk, who did Fight Club and several other things that people who enjoyed Fight Club have read. And, you know, one of my favorite books is called Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson. So I guess now, you know, every time I run through this list of, you know, who I read when I was, you know, in my teens or in my 20s or something, it just ends up being like just a list of a bunch of white guys like me. And, you know, and it wasn't, I think very early on, I started reading, trying to think, I read a lot of like Judy Blume and different stuff, Beverly Cleary, a bunch of female writers when I was younger. And then at some point you get told oh, well, those are girl books. You should be reading boy books. And so I, you know, kind of diverged off that path, and it took a long time to get back onto sort of reading a wide variety of writers.
It's a struggle from the bookstore end when you want to sell a book to somebody, and they're like a grandparent. It's usually a grandparent comes in. Say, oh, do you have any books for 10-year-old boys? Like, well, we have this book for 10-year-olds. The main character is a female.
Yeah.
Like just so happens to be female. I just put it in there so they don't get mad at me that I sold them a girl book. I tell them that there's a girl in the book and then try to sell them on it after.
Yeah. I mean, those were my favorite books, though. Beverly Cleary and whatever. And then, I went straight from that into Stephen King and Clive Barker and just this really, really dark horror stuff and sci-fi. And that was sort of my teenage years. And then it took a long time to sort of graduate and move on to where eventually I read romance and women's fiction and erotica, just sort of trying to read a little bit more widely than I was reading.
It's because you mentioned quite a few of my favorite authors, and one of my favorite aspects of doing these events is that I get to explore out and expand on the authors that I'm reading, because Chuck Palahniuk is one of my favorite writers of all time. And I've been working on different writing projects, and I'm just struggling to not be like write as Chuck Palahniuk. I'm reading it, I'm like, yeah, we got to stop doing this.
It's really tough not to write like another writer, especially someone who has their own sort of cadence to the material like Chuck Palahniuk does. And his stuff is, I still catch almost echoes of his stuff because I really copied that style that he did for a long time. And it took, 10 or 15 years to sort of shake off those influences. So, my early attempts though at novels were very much like sort of transgressive fiction, like Fight Club. But I realized that there's no genre in the bookstore for that. Yeah. So those type of novels are very, very difficult to sell. So,
and one thing I just want to throw out, anyone who's watching, if you're on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, you can use the comment feature on those platforms to ask any questions throughout the event. We frequently have local writers or even people not local that are trying to break in or write their first novel or edit their first novel. You do a lot of work helping writers hone their craft. Can you tell us a bit about your experience with that?
Oh, yeah, it's something that I started to do a number of years ago with the Carnegie Center in Lexington, and I still do some work with them. And we have another place in Louisville. Now, it's not like the main thing I do, but I teach some classes. And I just try to sort of, I would say, give back, to the writing community. It's really tough though. It's really tough because you don't know, who you're going to help out or, what the status of the writing. So I really had to be open to helping people with memoirs and helping people with this is my personal history or something, and sort of coming at these things with an open mind and saying they're not trying to be the next big name. They're not trying to be Nicholas Sparks. They're just trying to they just want to write this memoir. So I really take I don't sit there and polish their prose or anything, but I just really help people get their stories out, Yeah. And it's been really nice to see, I've had some people that have gone on and published books, after I've helped them out. So, which is really nice to see, that I haven't stunted anyone's growth. I think for a long time, it's really tough because as a writer, you already struggle with imposter syndrome, which is I'm not good enough. I'm not as good as people think I am, or, I just don't have anything to say. And so you already struggle with that. And then on top of that, say, do you want to help someone else out? And I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I have anything to say, but I really do enjoy, sort of helping people get their stories out.
Yeah.
And it's so different than, my own writing, which is great. Like I said, I'm not helping people, try to write humor like me usually, because there's no way I could do that. I couldn't say, here's how you punch this up and make it funnier. I just don't analyze my own stuff that closely, I guess.
Imposter syndrome has become such a big topic. And fortunately, my wife, I don't know I have just always suffered from imposter syndrome. My wife apparently hasn't, and it's never crossed her mind. So when I said the word, said the phrase, she's like, "What's that?" And then after we had the conversation, I don't know if it was just Facebook algorithms and such, but then like articles were popping up. Now there's a book that's either recently came out or is coming out called Imposter Syndrome.
Yeah,
one thing that helped to cure me, at least in the instance of my last job of managing a college bookstore. I was promoted pretty quickly, and I'm like, I don't know that know what I'm doing. And then I was on a Monday morning conference call. I'm like, oh, no one knows what they're doing. I'm fine.
I think everybody feels that way except for your wife, of course.
Yeah.
But most people do feel that way, no matter what your job is. You feel, whether you feel like, oh, I'm a parent and I'm just kind of making this up as I go along, or, is this what it's supposed to feel like to be 40 years old? I don't think so. I thought I was supposed to be grown up by now.
Yeah.
Everybody feels that to some degree. It just really hurts you as a writer, though, because writing is so much about self-confidence and making these choices, these conscious choices of what you're writing and where you're going. And if you're working on a novel, it might take you 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Oh, and you have to keep up that self-confidence that entire time,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really tough.
One of the authors that we spoke with a month or two ago, he was working on a novel. The novel that we were discussing was the Salt Fields, and it was a 10-year project for him. And I'm like, all right, I feel better. I'm like, I have been I've got 2 more.
My first book that I got published was called Great Philosophers Who Failed at Love, and it's nonfiction about the lives of philosophers. It's really more of a humor book. It just sort of contrasts their words with their own romantic lives and sort of romantic mishaps, because quite a few of them were misfits in that sense. And it was a book. It took me, I'd say, probably about 1.5 years to work on it in total, from conception to completing the book. And I was supposed to do an event with another person who had written a philosophy book, and we were sort of backstage at this bookstore. And right before we went on, we were supposed to have a discussion. And I say supposed to because it went terribly wrong at this point when, I said, gosh, it's just so great to, I've been working on this for so long, it's just been like 1.5 years, to get this book out there now. And, this is just such a relief. This is great. And he's like, I've been working on my book for 20 years. And then they're like, well, please welcome Andrew Shaffer, and he shall not be named. And I was like, oh no. And so it was about a half hour of the most just uncomfortable exchanges about philosophy. And he would just say no to everything I said. I think it reached this low point when I said, I've got a list of quotes here, and we're going to play a game called, is it Friedrich Nietzsche or Charlie Sheen? And he couldn't get any of them. And he just kept getting angrier and angrier as we went on. And I wrote, I am dynamite. And he's like, what is the point of this? This is stupid. I really riled him up. But that was, I got to say, there were some people there laughing, but they were laughing at the awkwardness of that encounter. Yeah. Deb, you want to talk about laughter in dark times, though? That was certainly a dark time for him. For me, it was just, I meant no disrespect.
So you work in satire, parody, through this as exhibit A of a bit absurdist. How are you making your comedic choices? What typically drives your projects?
like I said before, that there's not much of a market out there for sort of transgressive fiction. So that was what I started trying to write, was sort of works like Fight Club, where it was there was sort of an edge to them. And I'm not going to say I will say, yeah, I've probably softened in that respect over time and with age, and as I've matured as a writer and as a humorist, sort of some of that edge. So before, my sort of personal humor sort of went towards Bill Hicks, Doug Stanhope, Bill Burr, and I still like those suburbs, but I've just been expanding, different comedians that I go to, and like I said, the same thing with writing as well. I think it's just just a process of maturing as a writer, as a humorist, as a person, and so yeah. What was the question again?
I think you answered, like, just some of the influences that you have. What I've appreciated with your work is I am a big comedy fan. I'm fortunate that I live and work 15 minutes from the National Comedy Center in Jamestown. If you're ever in the area, it's a great place to check out.
Cool.
But I didn't have much of a social life in high school. So my big Friday night was Comedy Central's Friday night stand-up. So just watching that stand-up, like, I'm blanking on a lot of names now. Pretty much all of them. Mitch Hedberg, Early, Dane Cook, and just how comedy has kind of evolved over the last 20 years. It just seems so much of it is more like personable, and like I love like Mike Birbiglia and like the intimate stories that people tell. But we've kind of reached a level, especially like the most recent example is Bo Burnham. I don't know if you've watched his special yet.
I haven't seen it. No.
Like the big selling point for it is it's hilarious. You'll be crying and like uncomfortable. I'm like, I guess that's hilarious. But what I like about your work is that it's just more silly and escapist, which we're kind of like, I'm trying to get back to the comedy in the times of woe.
I think if you had met me, 20 or 25 years ago, that would not be the case.
Mm-hmm.
I started off sort of silly and wacky, and then sort of moved into very serious stuff and got into really dark comedians. It just sort of mirrors where you're at in your life. And now, and now I'm, just at a different, point in my life and my career right now, and where the humor is a little bit wackier. I think if you picked up one of my political books and expected really hard hitting satire, you're not going to get that. I've had some people say you're too easy on Joe Biden in this book, or Obama, or even Trump. You're too easy on these guys. And I'm like, that's just, I would rather write the book that's an escape from the moment rather than that sort of dark, hard satire, because I think it's difficult to get people to latch on to satire at times, especially because sometimes it feels so raw. Like with the pandemic, this thing that we've just gone through for 15 months and that I've already forgotten about. It was. I didn't want to watch any humor related to that. I didn't want to, because the humor, it was just, there wasn't much to go on. It was like, let's laugh at something about masks, or let's laugh at this, it just wasn't there. And so, I watched, just got into watching a lot of British comedy. In fact, I sound like a snob now. I'm like, I only laugh at British comedy now, and which is not true, because I do laugh at some Scottish comedians and Irish comedians as well. But I wanted to. I just didn't want to laugh at. I love Stephen Colbert, Trevor Noah, Samantha Bee, all these comedians who were telling jokes every night, but that just wasn't where I was. And I think it just hit too close to home. So I kind of get that now, where people say satire, oh, so-and-so has written the great 9/11 satire or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I lived through it. Do I need to experience that again? So yeah, and there were even some great books that have come out that have sort of been either written during the pandemic or influenced by, and it just doesn't touch me at all, I guess. I just, and you could say, one of the funniest thing that I found during the pandemic was Ted Lasso on Apple Plus, which is it's the most wholesome, funny show there is. And I could try to explain it to someone. It's this Kansas soccer coach. It's Kansas football coach who goes over to the UK to become a soccer coach. And I could say it's good natured. It's very sweet. It's funny, but you just have to watch it. But that was sort of like the funniest thing that I found. It had nothing to do with the pandemic, nothing to do with even, satire. Or I was just like, I'm purely living right now for escape the moment, laugh, get out. So that's sort of where my head's at. And,
Well, I was just one that was constantly rewatching The Office, where you'd finish it and like, oh, season 1, episode 1, we'll start it all over again. And then I think the pandemic was one of the things that like I didn't need to have jokes about the pandemic, but I just needed something different. And Schitt's Creek became my Ted Lasso.
We
had never watched the show before. My wife and I just binge watched the entire series, and now we're just starting it over again. And I think it's the lack of any sort of serious conflict, any conflict that shows up in that show is almost immediately resolved. And it's just like nice to it's funny. And it's just like this numbing experience of, I don't have to worry about anything bad happening to these characters. Cause even if it does, it's going to be resolved in the scene.
Yeah. And I think, I was talking to my wife before this. I was like, I'm going to talk about, humor in dark times. So I've got to talk about, gallows humor and really dark sense of humor. And she's like, what did we watch for the past year? We watched Ted Lasso and, goofy British comedies, Father Ted. We watched goofy stuff. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I didn't really binge on the dark stuff this time. And so I think, we might be going through a period. There were so many years where comedy just got sort of dark and cringy. And I think it's headed possibly in another direction right now. I don't know, I guess we'll see where that goes, but I don't see anyone wanting to, laugh at anything regarding I don't see anyone want to talk about it. There's really no great works of literature that reference the 1917-18 pandemic. It's like sort of skipped right over. You just start, we start at Great Gatsby and we go forward. What happened before that? We're not going to talk about it, Yeah. So there is this thing with those communal experiences where like we live through it. We don't need to talk about this. We're done. We get, you're wearing a mask. Very funny. Let's move on.
Well, it's become a frustration point for like shows that have tried to incorporate it. My wife and I watch like Law and Order SVU, Chicago Med, and
wait, is that all one title? Law and Order.
We watch them back to back. Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought it was all one title.
Yeah. Same creator. They have crossover episodes.
Yeah. Okay.
But they were trying to incorporate the pandemic, and the Chicago Med do a more deeper extent. But they're like, the main characters were just like, I'm going to wear a mask until I have a speaking part, and then I'm just going to be in this room speaking with my mask off. And there was just like on social media, all these people are like, can you just keep the mask on or keep it off? Like, are you existing in the world that we're in?
Yeah. I'm just like, there's oh yeah, I just don't think there's a need to do that. But yeah, but I mean, immediately my mind went to gallows humor, and like I said, my wife's mind went to what do we really enjoy, you know? And I think, you know, that does sort of come back to the original question that I had, which was, you know, how do you combine humor with writing? And I always felt that you had to be a little bit more serious, and you know, if I'm not adding something to the cultural conversation, that's, you know, satire is your punch in the man, you know, satire is I'm bringing you down, and you know, that's fine. I think we need those types of comedians out there. It's just taken me a long time to realize that I just don't, you know, feel like that's me at this moment. You know, it was at one time, maybe I could get really, really bitter and angry and, you know, hulk up, and I could, you know, release something that's really harsh and satirical on the world. But I don't know. I don't know if I have it in me.
Well, what I like about Hope Never Dies, and that was my wife reminded me, we met working at Barnes & Noble, and she reminded me that Gatsby and 50 Shades of Earl Grey were both on the bookshelves when we were there. I was the digital sales lead, so I was more focused on digital books than all of the thousands of books that were on me. That has changed over time. But we're a part of the American Bookseller Association, and every other month, we get what's called the White Box. And it's a box filled with books, like 40 or 50 books every month that are coming out later in the year. And I opened up the White Box in 2018, and sitting on top was Hope Never Dies. I didn't need to know anything about it, just the cover alone, like, this is going to be the next book I read. And I love what you did in terms of, like, you talked about not wanting to be like having it cutting edge to it, or like any like biting satire on it, but you have created such characters that, like, on the surface, like, oh yeah, that's obviously Obama and Biden, but then you create this reality for them that's just so believable. Like the opening part of the book with Biden watching clips of Obama like parasailing with Bradley Cooper, and his emotional response to like feeling left out and like never calls me anymore. You just did I don't have a question here. I'm just saying you did a very good job of
thank you.
Immediately creating this character out of somebody that we all know very well.
Yeah, that original that was the first scene I wrote for that book. It was the first scene in the pitch that I did to Quirk Books, and it never changed more than a couple of words for that whole chapter from the original pitch, which is just insane to think about. But it just sort of captured what I was going for so clearly, and I was like, oh, I could totally see this. But that book was interesting because, you know, the idea was, oh, we're going into this different world. You know, everyone's going to be talking about Donald Trump, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, let's not talk about Donald Trump. Let's zero in on why do people like Biden and Obama together. And it's not their policies. It's not anything to do with them being politicians. It was just, here's two people who clearly they didn't see eye to eye to begin with. And there was just a lot of animosity there. And over time they grew to like it was just a story of friendship. And I was like, that's what this is. It's a friendship. They've had a breakup. And I've just followed a romance novel arc, you know, where it was just like, here, I'm just going to hit every beat on a romance novel. And so, yeah, that was, and I did it making it very emotional. And so I think there is another world where there's a book like that, where it's just all talk of politics and this and that. But this one was just, I was just like, let's just talk about two friends who've fallen out of touch. And I think everybody could sort of relate to that. And so it sort of snuck in these emotions. And I know when I turned in my first draft to my publisher, he's like, there's some people that are, I was like, I kind of get emotional in places, and I don't know if that's the direction you want to go, but I just felt was right. And he's like, people here were crying, people got teary eyed. They're like, these two men, they need to make up. So it was a fun book, but again, that's another book where I just felt there were two different ways to go. And I think at that time we thought that we were entering the dark timeline. We're like, oh no, especially, on the liberal side of the aisle, which is where Donald Trump says this is all going to go. Oh, it's going to be 4 years of marches and this, and it ended up, you just get beat down. You get resigned to where you are. And by the time the book came out, all of the marches and all of the anger had sort of, subsided to where it was just this low level sort of grumpiness that had taken over the left. And so at that point, it ended up being the right thing, which was, people want to be entertained right now. And I think they got that in that book. And I think I only mentioned Donald Trump once and not by name. So,
and it wasn't until 2016 and looking through your list of books and reading quite a few of them that you really started to write political, with The Day of the Donald. I know that I got wrapped. I have worked on a lot of political campaigns over the years, and not until 2016, I've run different campaigns, and I still I never knew as many cabinet members as I did for the previous 4 years of just getting so wrapped up in politics. And is that kind of what led you into this world and wanting to write about these political figures?
I'm not going to say I grew up in a world of politics, but I did grow up in Iowa. And when you have the primaries there and the caucuses every 4 years, which ends up being basically every 2 years because those cycles get started earlier and earlier, you're just inundated with ads all the time. And so you just kind of get sick of politics. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to hear about it. I volunteered on some campaigns and stuff, but I was so thrilled. I actually moved out of Iowa. At that time, my wife and I were living in Oregon, and I was like, I'm so thrilled to just not be inundated with all these, the primaries are going on. I don't have to pay attention at all. I'm just letting other people deal with this. They don't even care about Oregon. And what happened was I got an offer to write that book, and I was like, oh no, I'm going back into it. And I just really got into, politics heavy and just haven't left since then, simply, because it's there's always built-in conflict, with political characters, and, politicians, and, everybody knows who they are, and you're sort of writing, on the cusp of parody / public domain / whatever. So, and I just thought, well, I'm here. I'm gonna enjoy it while it lasts.
Yeah. And being somebody who works in comedy, you have the aspect of, I don't know when you're being serious. So following you on social media, you had referenced at one point that there was a third book in the works for Biden and Obama.
Yeah.
Did you have a third one in mind that ended up?
There was a third one in mind. It was supposed to be them riding off into the sunset together, and on the cover it was going to be both of them on one horse riding off into the sunset, and it was sort of it was going to be a Western, actually. Because I wanted each book to have sort of its own feel. And that one I was like, this one's got to be a Western. It's got to be like Back to the Future Part 3 Western. And my editor's like, what? And I'm like, no, trust me. You get them on horseback. Oh, that's money right there. Unfortunately, fortunately, Joe Biden had a pretty big comeback, you could say. And so he's not going to be riding off on horseback anytime. And so I had another pitch for that. And that one's sort of on hold right now, because it was a pitch where it was set in the summer of 2020. Well, there was a pandemic that happened. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. Like you said, Law and Order, where they're just taking their masks on and their masks off, or you're constantly thinking about this. So it has to be said. I mean, realistically, there are ways around all of this, but I think as soon as Joe Biden got elected, people saw him and Kamala Harris as mom and dad now, if that makes sense. Like they were like these cool outsider figures. And then as soon as you become the authority, it's been nice not to think about politics most of the time, because they're not in the news like Donald Trump was every day. He's not tweeting every day and saying these things. And so I think people are just kind of like, give us a moment here before we kind of think about, and I think people need to reevaluate what their relationship is with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Barack Obama. And, it's so to be interesting to see if I'm able to sort of revive that. But it was always about where the characters are in their lives. In my books, it felt very much like I want to see them go off into the sunset. And the American people were like, no, let's bring Joe back one more time. I was like, dang it. So that's where that's at right now.
Yeah, as you were speaking, my brain was just turning of Obama having the Biden like role in Hope Never Dies, of now he's on the outside looking in.
Yes, and that was how that was going. It's going to start off like almost like a mirror image of that first book, where he's on the outside looking in. Joe Biden's the one with the spotlight, and he's kind of on the perimeter saying, "What am I going to do?" And what did Barack do? He did a podcast with Bruce Springsteen, which I found to be a very interesting choice. It almost seems like now Barack is the one sort of auditioning new best friends, which, we'll see where that relationship goes. I don't know.
Well, I am looking forward to whatever comes out of that. So as I was prepping for this, because we were going to talk about the necessity of comedy. We dabbled in it. I watched hours of documentaries on comedy. There was the History of Comedy docuseries on CNN, a couple other ones that were on like censorship and other things. And as I was trying to come up with it, I had my first question of why is comedy necessary? I'm like, that's too big of a question. Let's try to break it down into smaller ones. After watching hours of documentaries on comedy, I don't have a smaller question. So why is comedy necessary?
There's that saying, laughter is the best medicine. So at just that sort of vague level, laughter does relieve stress. It's sort of a release valve to where tension is building up in your body. That's what a joke is. A joke is a setup and then a punchline. So you set them up and then you sort of break that tension. And I think that's what comedy does to us, which is relieve all that tension that's sort of built up into our bodies. And, and it's not always a direct, one-to-one relationship. It doesn't have to be like we've been talking about. It doesn't have to be we're tense because of the pandemic. Let's watch The Office. Yeah. And so that doesn't seem to have anything to do with one another, but it's really, getting your whole body there. So that was the first thing I thought was laughter is the best medicine. And then it relieves stress, just also not physically, but also mentally as well. Especially, with gallows humor or very dark humor, people who work in stressful environments, it's just really hard to cope with that. So some of the funniest people that I've ever been around have been like morticians or surgeons, people with really difficult jobs where they're around illness and death. So, well, I guess morticians mostly work around death, but
the surgeons would be trying to avoid it. But
right.
Well,
Although I did know someone who worked at the same time as a nurse and as a mortician, and it would be kind of awkward when they would see the same family members that both are like, what kind of setup is this?
Seems like a bit of conflict of interest there.
You'd think so?
Mm-hmm. Hit him again with the paddles. Hold on.
Hold on.
But the kind of release that you can get from comedy, and just to hit on an earlier topic of like 9/11 or the pandemic, one of the things that I had watched, it had talked about Gilbert Gottfried, and it talked about the tsunami, which did not work out well for him. But he was one of the roasters for Hugh Hefner, and it was just like a few weeks after 9/11. And he had a joke about like his flight and a stop at the Empire State Building, and he got booed. But then he's like, I'm just going to lean into this and keep going. And he just made it worse and worse and worse. And you can question the methods, but there were so many comedians that were like, there was just this period of time where like, is it okay to joke? And Gilbert Gottfried just kind of like jumped on top of the grenade, and he's like, I'm just going to take the first hit here, and then everyone else after that is going to be okay. So that's a kind of roundabout way of the release that you can have from comedy, and the healing that it has, especially in reference to when you're trying to joke about a specific event.
Yeah, the first amateur stand-up I did was an open mic 2 weeks after 9/11. And every other comedian that did that night avoided 9/11. And I just immediately launched into jokes about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it really brought the house down and really elevated my expectations for what my abilities were. I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be great. I'm going to be the next stand-up, blah, blah. No, that was just kind of a one-time thing, because it had just, this tension had been building the whole night. People are like, oh, we're out here again. We're supposed to laugh. Well, first off, these are amateur comedians, so I'm always laughing. Yeah. And then I just get up there and say the thing that's on everybody's mind. I'm like, we are in the middle of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. What are you afraid they're going to hit around here? Cap'n Crunch? Are they going to take our crunch berries from us? Hell no. USA. And so yeah, and so that was really just a moment of relief. But that was, gosh, that's 20 years ago now. Good Lord. I think not bad at math. I was pretty good at math, but it's just kind of slacked off on it now. Yeah, no, I think that there are those times though that it's just really necessary, and that it's really easy. I think the time that I got the best laughs, I think maybe just amongst like a group of friends, was at a funeral. I kind of said the thing that was on everybody's mind, and they just cracked up, and the person's widow came up afterwards and was like, that, we really needed that. That was, I just didn't realize how much we needed to laugh, and I was like, oh, again, I was like, great room though. Great funerals, great room.
Well, I think there's the difference in legitimacy, where you didn't quite have it as this stand-up comedian, but as a friend of the family.
As a friend of, yeah, exactly. You don't book a comedian for it. It's one of the weird things where I find that the funniest things that happen, the funniest things I laugh at it's not a comedian in a comedy club. Because comedy clubs and the 2-drink minimum and the bachelor party in there or bachelorette party, and then you've got a bucket of beer on the table. It's just, and then you've got to clear out because they're going to do a 10 o'clock show. It's not really a conducive environment. It takes a lot to get you laughing. And then once you do, you just have that expectation. It's really hard to set up to break that tension. But I think like I said, the funniest laughs I've ever heard were funerals, and other places where you just wouldn't expect to find that humor.
Well, there's something to be said for just like the natural aspect of comedy. And Brian Regan, I saw him, my wife and I saw him years ago at Shays in Buffalo, and great set. But one of the funniest aspects of it was there was a piece of dust that was just slowly falling down, and we were up in the balcony, so we saw it coming down, and then it just came down right in front of Brian Regan's face, and he's just like, and then he did 5 minutes on, like, it wasn't even dust, it was just like this little piece of paper, and he's did 5 minutes on that piece of paper, and he's like, all right, Brian Regan's here. We've got to make it big. Let's drop some confetti. Oh, we don't really have anything in the budget for confetti. What about confetti? Confetti we can do.
Yeah. The funniest things when you see a comedian live, the funniest stuff is often when they get off topic or when they're interviewing someone in the crowd, because you just don't know what's going to happen. And so immediately, if they're interviewing someone in the crowd, it's like, oh, anything could happen. And you kind of get this nervous feeling, and you're kind of all like, oh my God. I kind of feel the same way at book readings. I don't know if you do, but when they ask for a question from the audience, and then someone like just grabs the mic and they just start launching into something where you don't know if it's a question or if it's just like a 5-minute statement or a list of grievances. You don't know what they're going to say. And this kind of circles actually all the way back around to Chuck Palahniuk. I was always very nervous. First off, as a writer, when I get up there and someone's asking me a question, I'm nervous. I don't know what they're going to say. I don't know what's going to happen. But because I know I was very nervous asking questions when I was in a crowd. This was probably about, I think the year 1999 or 2000. I saw Chuck Palahniuk reading in Iowa City at Prairie Lights, and very small crowd, maybe 50 people there. And he asked for questions, and I'm thinking, I've got this great question in mind. He's going to hear this and he's going to go, have you ever thought about writing? And I'll be like, oh, well, actually, now that you mention it, I'm a bit of a writer myself. It's what I thought was going to, I don't know what the heck I thought was going to happen, but I get the microphone and I just look at him and I say, I'd like to thank you for everything you've done for the weightlifting community. And then I hand the microphone back. I don't know what that means. My question did not have anything to do with weightlifting. It didn't have anything. You can't see my small arms here, but I'm not part of the weightlifting community. It was just a random bunch of words that just came out of my mouth. And he was like, you're welcome. And then it was like on to the next person. I was like, does it have something to do with Fight Club? Does it have something to do? I have no idea. But that was, and there was some laughter there just because it was just when he said, you're welcome. It was where the laughter comes in. Cause it was the only thing he could say. What else are you going to say? So yeah, when you introduce that tension,
he has that way about him. Cause I went to a reading in Toronto when Rant came out in 2007. And I went up and I thought I had lined up in the front of the line. Turns out I had lined up in the back of the line. So I ended up being like the second to last person to talk to him. Just awkward. And then in January of last year, before the world shut down, I was at the Winter Institute and he was there. And at that point, I was in the front of the line. And I was one of the first people that talked to him. And I think it's the effect that Chuck Palahniuk has on people that I just both times really sort of meaningful connection that I had ever hoped to have there. So I get it. I've been there.
Yeah.
For the weightlifting community, but
well, he's done so much that we can never pay him back for all the stuff he's done for the weightlifting community. I don't know. I mean, I'd never been that embarrassed, and I go, thank God this is not. Oh, it is archived online on Prairie Light's website. Oh my gosh,
I will.
So awful.
I'll see if I can find that. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up for the evening?
Let me look at my extensive list
for the weightlifting
notes here. Yeah, we've already covered the weightlifting community. No, I have nothing else of value. My imposter syndrome has reached has started to creep back in now. The longer you speak to a writer, the more their imposter syndrome will take over too. It's creeping back in now.
Well, I think you have to be concerned when it doesn't. So.
Yeah, you go full Kanye. And that's also a problem. So I think it is definitely a balancing act.
I want to thank myself.
Yeah. Every time I write like a good line, my wife will does this. She's a writer and she'll write a really good line, and I'll hear from downstairs. She'll be upstairs writing. I'll hear, "Woo, I'm good." I'm like, what was that? What was that? I was like, you go full Kanye now. No, but she says, woo.
Well, that was actually, there was one last question if you've got time for it. Is it difficult having two writers in the house? Do you ever collaborate or do you keep work at work?
Oh, like I said, if I'm downstairs and I'm having trouble, like I'm slogging through like a rough draft or I'm trying to work something out and I hear her upstairs just typing away and then she screams, "I'm good." I'm like, I got to get out of here. I'm going to go to like a co-working space or a coffee shop or something. Over the past year, it was just, we're kind of both in here together, but we haven't really collaborated anything, although we do beta reads and edit each other's work. Mm-hmm. So there is that. One of the things that's weird is that I will add some, people think that I punch up her work to make it funnier, and she adds, like, maybe she writes romance and women's fiction, so she adds some emotion or something to my books, but it's the exact opposite. I'll read her books and be like, "Oh, you can deepen this character here," and she'll read my books and give me the funniest lines. So I think she writes some of the funniest, erotica and women's fiction, and it's not parody. It's just people get into funny situations and say funny things, and you don't expect it. Again, when you least expect it, that's when it's funny. That's when it's the funniest. So she does that, but yeah. Two writers in the same household. When we do give, when we do do a markup or something, do a bunch of red pen editing on someone's work, or give it back and just say, this isn't working. You're going to have to go back to the drawing board and this whole thing. Those are the ones where it's like, okay, because you think you can emotionally handle that. No, it's like kind of like avoid each other like two cats that have just been introduced, for the next 2 or 3 days, because you just get hurt feelings, and that happens, even if you get feedback from your editor, and you just focus on the negative stuff. You're like, oh, you didn't like that character, you didn't like that. So so it can be those times, but we learn to work through that, and we talk about our works in progress constantly, and and often when and I'm she might have this, but I have imposter syndrome where I'll be like, oh my God, you're just so much better than me. And she'll be like, I know. So it's kind of a relationship.
Well, when you're married to Kanye, so.
Oh, I know.
Well, we have a lot of your books in stock, but this is the newest one. Look, Mom, I'm a poet, and so is my cat. These are hilarious.
I brought
my
cat
daughter
here.
Immediately. I opened the package at work that you sent us. Thank you for that. And she immediately took the wind up possum / cat. So we're in our house. We keep freezing, so I don't know if you can hear me.
Suddenly, I can't hear you.
We're frozen.
Suddenly, you two started to play.
I was just saying. I said we keep freezing, so I don't know if you can hear me. I think that's the universe saying that it's after 8 o'clock. But I'm going to do a quick plug for all of your books. Buy them. We have them. They're great. We also have events coming up. Next Wednesday, we're going to be talking to Lisa Marie Redmond. This is The Parting Glass. It's book 5 in her cold case investigation series. We have sold more copies of Lisa Marie Redmond's books than any other author. Andrew, I think you're a close second. You were in our top 10 in 2018, possibly 2019 for our
really? Wow.
But she's great. She's a retired cold case detective from Buffalo. She'll be with us for a virtual author talk and then be our first in-person book signing because apparently the pandemic is over in New York State. Our event in July 7th is Lieutenant Dangerous, Jeff Danziger. Jeff is a nationally syndicated political cartoonist through the Washington Post. Lieutenant Dangerous is his Vietnam memoir. And then we just recently booked Dax Devlin Ross, Letters to My White Male Friends, for July 15th. It's a Thursday event. Almost all of our events are on Wednesday, but we signed up our kids for a track program, and I am now missing all of their meets. So this is a Thursday event. Letters to My White Male Friends, Dax Devlin Ross. We were super fortunate to get a hold of him. He was recently interviewed by the COO of Facebook, and now we're going to be an event after that.
Yeah, this is like a pretty big get. Yeah,
I mean,
great.
Andrew Shaffer, you are the first New York Times best-selling author that we've ever had. So I was excited to get you on board. But
I am pretty good.
I'm comfortable talking about comedy. I'm nervous to talk about racism as a very white male in a very white county. So we'll see how that goes. I would tune in just to watch the awkwardness that will come about from that event. But I wanted to play us out with the promo event or the promo trailer for Lisa Redmond's event. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning in tonight.
In the independent bookselling world, readers are represented by two separate, yet equally important groups. The authors, who write novels, and the booksellers, who curate them. These are their stories.